Hello, welcome to Story Elixir. This is the start of a Kingdom Hearts analysis series where I take a closer look at the story of Kingdom Hearts in timeline order as we go through them. If you want to watch me playing through these games, the playlist is in the top corner. I will only use information from back cover and Union Cross from the beginning up to the Keyblade War in this analysis video, and will not include any information that a player would not know outside of these two sources. There is extra information that a player would have if going in release date order, but that's not the purpose of this series. I will cover a lot of that extra information when we get there in the timeline. First off, the universe of Kingdom Hearts uses a magic system and a type of world building that is typically referred to as soft. This mainly means that the story rarely explicitly states hard and fast rules about how the magic works, how the world works, but we will get just enough for the story to still function as a functioning story. They will still have a structure, but it won't be like in our world where we are taught the exact temperature at which water boils. That's a hard system. It's a very strict rule, generally speaking. A soft system just says that water eventually boils after a while. This is usually because the characters within the story don't have a solid grasp of the rules, or things might be happening that are relatively new and so they don't know about it, or the knowledge has been lost to time. Generally just the characters themselves don't have the tools or knowledge to explain what's happening, so they don't. Or they give a best guess instead of a hard and fast rule. I do want to stress this does not automatically make the writing weaker. Soft worlds, soft systems like this are extremely flexible. And so they usually work really well when telling a story that focuses on characters and themes and abstract ideas, these kind of things, like Kingdom Hearts does. If you want a film example or a couple of film examples, Ghibli films are fantastic, and Lord of the Rings is really good too. Yes, Lord of the Rings has the Silmarillion, which does give more of that more concrete background information, but in actual Lord of the Rings, the book, it is extremely soft. On to events that happened before the plot, I guess. The Master of Masters gave 5 of his 6 apprentices a copy of this magical book called the Book of Prophecies. Its main power is being a record of future events through the perspective of the master, through specifically an eye embedded within a specific keyblade. The master also gave all 6 of his apprentices a role for them to fulfill whenever he vanished, whenever he would disappear, this kind of thing. Back cover mostly just handles these details and gives us a deeper understanding of what the foretellers' personalities are, what their motivations are, what they're doing behind the scenes, this kind of thing. The one thing that really struck me as odd, even on a very first viewing, before I learned more about what was going on, was just how unsuited these people were to their assigned roles. Or at the very least, if they're doing fine in their role, that they would be better in a different one. Let's start with the leader, Ira. He was assigned to be this group's leader, but they make it pretty clear that he has no interest in doing so. He stays in the foreteller's chamber, poring over his copy of the book, trying to glean it for answers, trying to find the solution to the Keyblade War, trying to prevent it from happening. And this tendency is known to the master when assigning the roles. He makes comments about it. So it doesn't really make sense to give him this leadership role knowing that there's another one that you intend to fill that is explicitly about finding an answer through the book. He would be more suited to using the book to find the traitor, which brings us to Gula's role. He's tasked with finding this traitor using a page from the book that no other foreteller has. Gula is clever, and they show it off a little bit when he's being assigned to the role. They have him be smart, but he's also young, he's narrow-minded, and he doesn't trust the other foretellers except for maybe Ava. And the master encourages him to keep being distrustful.
Trust no one but yourself.
But in order to figure out who the traitor would be, you'd have to use more than just this one page. You'd have to look at the entire situation and figure out what's going on. You'd also have to get multiple people trying to brainstorm this answer together in order to think of different perspectives or come at the problem from different angles in order to solve the mystery. You can't do it by yourself with such limited amount of information. You would need either more information or more people. So his tendencies to be suspicious and to not tell anybody actively makes doing his job more difficult. And also, the way he acts upsets the other foretellers or even escalates all the conflict that's happening between them all, because he just doesn't think about the long-term consequences of withholding this kind of information or how he would look if he turned on one of his allies. Again, this role to watch from afar and to not get involved and to let the foretellers tear each other apart is a role that the master would need filled. And Gula slots into it a lot better than the one he's actually given, because he already, within the plot, just sits back and watches while he does his own thing. Alright, so what about Luxu, the one who was given the watching role? Unfortunately, most of his characterization is fleshed out in the second half of Union Cross and in games that are past Union Cross, so I can't elaborate on him too much here. For my own personal knowledge of the series, I'd slot him into the leader role instead, but I'll get into the reasoning behind that in the next analysis video, so please look forward to that. So let's talk about the girls now. It really does feel like these two should have been switched. Invi was tasked with being the group's mediator, but she's extremely strict in how she follows the master's teachings and insists that others do the same. She's really inflexible this way, and she tends to verbally kind of shut down other perspectives or what people are talking about, or just shut down the person entirely if they even hint that they might be breaking a teaching or they're thinking about breaking a teaching. This kind of way of communicating and this kind of strict adherence to these teachings that's really inflexible means she's not really able to compromise with other people, which is what you need to be a mediator. However, these extremely strict standards that she holds everyone to would make her fantastic as a recruiter, because these standards are so high. She'd be very selective on who she allowed into what is now known as the Dandelions. And so they either would be as effective as they are in canon, or they would be more effective if she were the one in charge. This now brings us to Ava. Now, Ava is an example of someone being just fine in the role they're given. She accomplishes the task just fine. However, if you think about how she acts and what her motivations are, she fits as a mediator better. She's approachable, she genuinely cares about everyone around her, be it another foreteller or even just a regular union member, and she desires to solve conflicts. The one that's taking the most attention right now is the Keyblade War that's looming over the story, but she doesn't like when two foretellers are in conflict with each other. She specifically says this.
When will it stop? I don't want us to turn against each other.
So she has the drive to be a mediator. She also has a reputation of always doing the right thing and being a straight arrow and being really upfront with people. So she has all of the foretellers' trust, generally speaking, at least in the beginning. Another big thing that would make her a really good mediator is her communication style. When she makes decisions that possibly oppose another foreteller, either their goals or what they want, she will acknowledge their point of view in a non-judgmental way. It shows that she's listened to their side, but disagreed with it on her own grounds, and she explains why she disagreed with them. This is a really common tactic when mediating, is to kind of go, I acknowledge what you want and why you want it, but I think that's not necessarily the right decision because of these factors that you may not have considered. And the last thing I really should highlight about Ava is that she was explicitly told not to get into any battles at all.
Don't get involved in any battles.
But Ava wants to get in the middle of it and be helpful. She wants to solve the conflict. It's her disobeying this specific instruction that technically starts off the Keyblade War. If you look at a similar battle between Aced and Invi, Aced is the clear aggressor, he's the one that attacked her, and Invi battles primarily defensively for almost all of it, and when she does switch to being offensive, it's after she tries to have a conversation with Aced. Now, a heated conversation, it's an argument, but she still attempts to talk first. So I do get the sense that if things had been switched around or if things panned out differently, then Invi would have avoided the conflicts that Ava could not. And speaking of Aced, you might have noticed that the only role left to him is the one he's canonically given. I haven't moved him. I think that he was placed correctly, but having him follow Ira was the problem. Ira being not a good leader is what makes Aced a bad left hand. As far as Aced can tell, Ira isn't solving the problems. He's staying cooped up in the foreteller's chamber and reading. And everybody knows that darkness is encroaching because they all see the nightmare Chirithy. So Aced feels threatened by the encroaching darkness that is becoming more prominent, and their leader is not even looking up from his book. Who would not get anxious about this? Who would not want to take action? If you add in the master's orders to take control if Aced felt that Ira was not doing a good job, of course he would then decide to do so. As far as he's concerned, he has his master's blessing. So I think a strong, decisive leader would have made Aced act differently. There would probably be more cooperation between the foretellers than what we have canonically. There's obviously no way to confirm this because that's not what happened. The writers do show that Aced is also ambitious and does want to be the leader, so he could have tried this with anybody. But I do think it would be less likely based on the information we actually have from the canon. So, now that we've handled the foretellers and what their whole deal is, we can finally discuss the actual plot of Union Cross up to the Keyblade War. There's more in there, like I've mentioned, but nothing that a fresh new player without any other information would know. We start in the depths of our own heart, standing on a platform of stained glass. This is a standard starting point for Kingdom Hearts games, so a returning player would feel right at home despite the fact that we have shifted to a simpler puppeteer 2D kind of look. Also, having the player start in this void of a non-physical space and asking the vague question of where your heart belongs is likely the writers trying to prime the audience into thinking about this universe and this story in an abstract way rather than thinking about the heart as the physical thing keeping us alive with valves and, blood pumping and stuff like that. Kingdom Hearts, as a story and as a universe, is built upon its symbolism and its themes, especially of connections being powerful and how strong emotions and ambitions can shape a person and how those ambitions and emotions can affect the world around them. The series also touch on things like what defines an individual as a person and what even is identity and other identity-based themes. All of those things I just listed are difficult to quantify in like a solid, measurable way. Like, how does one use a graph to measure one's connections? It's difficult to do. So the world of Kingdom Hearts was made softer and more fluid to better suit what the writers are trying to do, what they're trying to say. They want to handle these abstract ideas, and so they have to make Kingdom Hearts softer as a system to give them the flexibility to talk about their themes. However, if the world works in that way, the audience has to be told that it works that way. So we have to be put into a headspace that encourages this kind of abstract thinking. So they do. In the very first scene, they physically place our custom-made character that we made in an abstract space and ask a vague question. This is something they do all the time. I'll do a deep dive about this specifically when I do Kingdom Hearts 1 because it's what began this trend. And it also has that gorgeous opening movie that hammers this idea more than this current opening does. I happen to like the fact that they don't tell the player what being in a union means or what the goals of each union are. Ultimately, the character would not know these things going in, and this information also isn't immediately necessary to understand the beginning of the plot. So, at the cost of nothing, it's free. It keeps the player aligned with their avatar in this opening. Both are kind of thrown into this world, and there's no time to explain because darkness is already an active threat. So, our character chooses a union, and the player character is nearly swallowed by darkness immediately, before being saved by the Keyblade. Again, standard stuff. This is the story confirming and telling us, the player, that the main protagonist has darkness within their heart, which makes sense. Most people in Kingdom Hearts do have darkness in their heart and can be influenced by it. Having no darkness in your heart is considered unusual and exceptional in Kingdom Hearts. So it is telling us stuff we should already know, but even to a new player, it establishes that rule from the start. Once we're put outside of our own heart in Daybreak Town, our main setting, our union leader, which changes depending on what union you pick, tells us we're chosen by the Keyblade and just states one of the core themes of Kingdom Hearts. They tell the player that they need to combine their strength with others to take down more powerful foes. It's that connection theme again. You'll see it all over the place. Before leaving, the leader gives the player a goal. Find out who among the union members has been corrupted by darkness. This is an interesting thing to do because the player has been told, again, by that whole darkness swallowing our character thing, that this could be our character. But a player is unlikely to come to that conclusion because in modern video games, the player is usually playing the hero, the chosen one, the good guys, whatever, right? A morally good person. There are plenty of exceptions. I can name like 5 off the top of my head if I really wanted to, but that's not the point. It's not often that we play as the problem rather than the solution. This is because of things like player agency. Players generally don't enjoy playing the antagonist without their consent. Players will often play as the villain or a bad guy or a dick when they're doing specific kinds of runs. The one I'm thinking of right now is the genocide run from Undertale. So it is an option that the players like having, but they tend to opt into that kind of run. It's not something they prefer by default. Also, people generally don't like to explore the idea that they might be the issue instead of some external force or another person making them do it or, whatever. Because the player is controlling the character, it's easy to upset or alienate the player by having the character do something or be something that the player didn't intend for them. Especially a custom-made one like the main character in Union Cross, because we created them, we crafted them. So, because of this, and a couple of other factors, but this one's the big one, the player is unlikely to suspect their own avatar only a few minutes after making them. But the game has given us a potential answer to this mystery immediately, right away. So if you keep that in mind, it's less of a mystery. But anywho, the little creature, Chirithy, hurries us to our first task without letting us fully understand the conflict we've been thrown into or understand the world that we're in. At this point in the universe's history, darkness is winning. This is a losing battle. The entire premise of Union Cross and back cover is that this results in an inevitable conflict that basically causes the end of the world. So there's really no time for a Keyblade wielder living in this specific age to slowly come to grips with being chosen or taking their time to decide how best to use the power or what they should be doing. Darkness is already looming. Darkness is already a problem, so we gotta go. While we're here, let's talk about Chirithy a little bit. All of the Chirithy are creations of the Master of Masters, who basically describes them as friendly spirits and loyal pets. However, they can be tainted by darkness just like our wielders, because the two are tied together. If a wielder dies, so does their Chirithy. If their wielder becomes corrupted, so do they. However, Chirithy is also the one giving us our tasks, teaching us, is the intermediary between us and the foretellers. Basically, Chirithy is our minder or our handler in the beginning, and they work for the foretellers. They are the creation of the Master of Masters. Like, they're not gonna pick the person they're supposed to be watching over their creator. That would be wild. There's a couple more things about Chirithy that I won't go into because it uses information from the other games, but that's a good understanding to know what I'm talking about for this video. Also, fun fact, Chirithy's visual design is based on the Scottish Fold, a domestic cat breed. Look at how cute they are. I love them. But darkness waits for no one, so you must wander through various Disney worlds to try and halt the advance. Players who are familiar with Kingdom Hearts would be used to wandering the worlds like this. This is normal. But the self-contained narratives found within each world are not as important to the larger plot in isolation by themselves. Okay, then why am I even talking about them if they're not important? I've skimmed over other things without a word. The Disney worlds serve a few essential purposes in a structural way. And they do this for a lot of Kingdom Hearts, not just this game, although it's more prevalent in this game. 1. Whenever we go to a Disney World, it shows that time is passing. The overarching narrative from when the Master disappears to the Keyblade War resolving lasts roughly a year, maybe add a month or two in either direction. However, our little character doesn't just cease to exist whenever the plot isn't happening, and if the writers went from just plot event to plot event without any gaps in between, it would not feel like a year to the players. It would only feel like a week or so. Maybe a month at tops. So showing that our character goes to these worlds and they help people and they go on adventures when nothing important is happening shows the player what the main character does for their normal routine. It's how our character lives and does things if nothing interrupts that. 2. It gives our character motivation that has little to do with the main plot. Yes, as the main character, we have to be around whenever something important happens. That's part of being the main character. However, if that encompassed every single aspect of our little avatar, they wouldn't be a believable character. They would just feel like us being thrown into this world. It wouldn't feel like our character belongs in the world of Kingdom Hearts. People's motivations are varied and they change all the time. So a character that can't replicate at least an approximation of that won't feel right to an audience. They'll feel two-dimensional, flat, boring. So what's this character's starting motivation? Going to work and doing their job, and then going home. I know, so glamorous. Being a Keyblade wielder in the age of Fairytales is a regular job. In this mythical lost age, wielders are downright common. They're everywhere. And so they have a functional role within their society that utilizes their unique skill set. There's so many of them, you have to structure them somehow. There's even an entire organizational structure around them with competing factions and measurable metrics, like corporations. And the main character is just one wielder among many, a cog in the machine. So yeah, their starting motivation is doing their job real good. We love them. Aren't they cute? Thirdly, it helps with the plot's pacing. I mentioned this briefly in the first point, but it's important to stress as its own point as well. The story of the Keyblade War is a slow buildup of misunderstandings, simmering resentments, and mistakes over the course of multiple months that come to a head in the most destructive way possible. This kind of story demands a slower pace to let those resentments simmer, to let those misunderstandings explode. Now, video game pacing trends towards slow anyway because of players wanting to do gameplay things instead of the story, or because of hardware limitations like loading times. So even an action-packed game is generally slower paced than an action-packed film. However, if the Disney worlds were removed, or even if they were just shortened too much, the pace would be sped up because you're not spending as much time in these filler worlds. So you have to keep them relatively lengthy, obviously not too long or you start to bore the player, but you have to keep them relatively lengthy to make sure that slow buildup actually happens and actually feels like a slow buildup. And lastly, it's free characterization. This is a fantastic place to let our character solve problems and do things without any of those problems or things affecting the main plot. A lot of our initial characterization of this main character comes from how they interact with the various Disney characters and Chirithy, which also fleshes them out as a believable character, without it feeling that they could just go solve the plot already. What are they doing? Helping a couple of dwarves out of a mine doesn't quite equal to being able to stop a war. So I will briefly talk about what we do in the Disney worlds kind of as we go. So we go to the Dwarf Woodlands to find the lost dwarves that I was just talking about, helping them out of their mine. We wander around in Wonderland because it's Wonderland and it's hard to navigate, and we save Aladdin and Agrabah. All these first visits are likely to establish setting and to introduce conflict for us to kind of work on over the course of this game. So after those three, we return to Daybreak Town and we get a Power Bangle from a Chirithy who encourages us to always keep it equipped. However, as this conversation is ending, our Chirithy comes into view behind our character. They even do a little camera pan to show it. This should clue in the player that, 1, there's multiple Chirithys, which awesome. 2, that Power Bangle we just got is extremely suspicious. Our regular Chirithy didn't give this to us. 3, the Chirithy we just spoke to is, of course, not ours, and so should not be trusted. We don't know where this Chirithy came from. And lastly, there's already some kind of larger plot thing happening out of the character's sight, out of the player's view. Something's going down behind the scenes. We just don't know what it is yet. However, our character does not know that there are multiple Chirithys. They've only seen the one, and the one we just talked to looks just like ours. So our little avatar will just take the gift and move on. They don't know. And on that note, I do want to take the time to discuss the difference between character knowledge and player knowledge. These two things are not the same, which sounds obvious when I say it like that. Of course they're not. Duh. However, it doesn't only apply to things like plot details like I just talked about. It also applies to things like the music signaling the mood in the background that only the audience can hear, how we associate certain colors with specific personality traits, or at least emotions. It relates to what camera angles are being used. Hell, it even goes to what character we're currently following, because sometimes we leave the main character to go follow like the villain, etc., etc. All visual media. So film, shows, games, anything that has a visual element to it, use a lot of this audio and visual language to tell the audience what's going on. It's to give clarity to the audience. You know, it says where allegiances lie. It'll tell us important symbolism because it'll be everywhere. It'll tell us how to feel about various characters and events. It gives us what the villain is doing, even though the main character might be a continent away. Stuff like this. For example, let's look at the animated version of Scar real quick from The Lion King. Now, the audience knows basically from the moment we see him, this is our bad guy. This is our villain. I mean, look at him. His entire color palette is darker and more muted than Simba, our main character, and has green eyes. Green is often used to symbolize envy in color theory, and his dialogue just reinforces it once he starts actually talking in that really deep, threatening Jeremy Irons voice. The artists also use a lot of triangles everywhere in his design as part of his shape language. Triangles are used to show that something is dangerous or that something is shifty or, you know, generally just not a good place to be. It's pokey, it hurts. You can really see it in his face, where the top half has this fur that flares out a little bit and the bottom half is narrow and comes down to a point where his fur kind of makes a beard. He just looks and sounds shifty from go. These are all things that communicate a lot about this character to us, the audience, even without him moving or doing anything plot related. But the characters in universe don't have a reason to suspect this lion until he commits an evil act before their eyes. If I tried to apply the exact same analysis I just did with Scar onto a real person, suddenly I'm over here being extremely judgmental over things like how someone looks, what their voice sounds like, what birthday they have, what's their blood type. It doesn't translate very well to real world actions, which means that the characters can't be expected to act like the villain is evil until they do something evil before their eyes. Until Scar is ousted by Simba and admits to murdering Mufasa, he's just a different colored lion with a bad attitude. And yeah, he ain't well liked. He's a bad king. But until the characters know that he's a murderer, they're not gonna do anything about it. So, if we then take that information and apply it to Kingdom Hearts, we have to also do this. Kingdom Hearts uses a lot of these techniques to, 1, look like Disney, that's the point of the aesthetic, and because they're trying to make their story clear to a younger audience, who benefit greatly from these easily recognizable symbols. So, things are going to happen throughout the series, not just with this game, that the audience might find irritating, because a character may not notice details that the player does. Or a character will listen to a clearly evil character because it's being made clear to us, the audience, that this dude's evil, but the character is listening to the bad guy because we have so much more information than the characters do at any given moment. And we need to be aware of that advantage that we have as the audience when looking at Kingdom Hearts. It's for kids. Of course, I as an adult am going to pick up things a lot faster than a 10-year-old. So, we know that the Chirithy that gave our character the Power Bangle is not our normal handler, but our character does not, and continues their job as normal, and they wear the Power Bangle that they were told to wear. They help repair a busted gummy ship, they find more missing dwarves, and they help in Agrabah again. We've had some time to get used to this current routine, so after a little bit, Chirithy starts giving the player and the character more information. We've had time to acclimate. This is where we're told about the inevitable Keyblade War and given some exposition about how we collect light, why we collect light. We're also given a hint that the foretellers don't quite see eye to eye here, but it's more in terms of they just have different roles and everything's fine. It's less about them fighting right now. It's just they go about things in different ways. Okay. However, soon after this, we begin to encounter new types of enemies, and their numbers are increasing, and the ones that we have been fighting are getting stronger. This is a clear signal that the situation is gradually worsening over time. It also happens to increase our little avatar's workload, and we get access to Olympus Coliseum to show that we're being stretched to now go help Olympus Coliseum. So we go check out Olympus Coliseum a little bit, and then we go to the Dwarf Woodlands again to assist the movie plot by getting all the dwarves together now, and by helping Snow White get through the forest to the cottage, make sure everybody's doing the movie plot correctly. Chirithy pops in here to explain how each of the worlds are constructed a little bit. They refer to Snow White as a precious light for this world, and suggest that these precious lights are like load-bearing pillars for each world. They keep the world stable and functioning as a cohesive world and not falling apart all the time. I personally love this touch because it reflects how a main character functions in a story normally. The main character is one of the main stabilizing forces of the story and the fictional universe they belong to. Often they're one of the main driving forces of the plot. We, the audience, tend to know them the most, and most of the world that the audience knows is seen through their eyes and tinged with their perspective. This is why badly written main characters tend to make a story less immersive or less interesting. So, Snow White, functioning as a precious light for the Dwarf Woodlands, is roughly the same role that she fulfills as the main character in the animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, at least in a structural way. However, we get to do something a little different this time. As I said before, most of the time, the stories inside of the Disney worlds don't matter too much, but every once in a while, we will get things that are related to the main plot within a Disney world. Little breadcrumbs that move us along, usually in terms of a character's character arc. So when we're in the Dwarf Woodlands, we get some initial characterization of our own character. We already knew they were generally helpful, like a lot of Kingdom Hearts protagonists, but the conversation that we have with Chirithy after we unite Snow White with the dwarves reveals that our little avatar is lonely. If you think about it, all this person does is go to work and then go home, and the only person they talk to on a regular basis is Chirithy, their handler. They want friends. They want a social life. They're lonely. This is really interesting characterization, especially for a silent protagonist, because a lot of fantasy stories have an inciting incident, a thing that happens, that interrupts the main character's daily routine and throws them into this very exciting, action-filled story. Normally, they then find a group of companions and comrades along the way, which eventually help them solve the plot. That doesn't happen here. Having our main character feeling isolated because all they do is work all the time and have no social life is interesting because it goes against what is normally done in a high fantasy setting like Kingdom Hearts. And these feelings would only intensify when we get back to Daybreak Town. Another new dangerous foe has appeared, and our character tries to band together with other wielders to deal with it. They're trying to create that social life. However, only our little character returns, and the other wielder's Chirithy just reports an apology rather than explaining what happened to them. So the main character only knows that they didn't come back. back. Now, the main character could think they got stood up, or they could think that the others had died. It doesn't really matter which one they think. It wouldn't change the fact that this kid tried to create a social network and failed to do so. And this situation is also telling the player that this job is becoming increasingly dangerous. Neither the player nor the character have a full picture at this point, but you can see like these two perspectives are separating a little bit. The character is grappling with loneliness and isolation, but the player is being given just how much this world is trying to grind down their main character. It is tragic on two fronts. Not a great time. The player is also given confirmation that the other wielders did lose themselves to darkness. So even if you didn't get it from just, hey, a new dangerous foe showed up and then these wielders never came back, the game then confirms that suspicion in case it was lost somewhere. But still, our main character must do this job. Again, we're losing wielders. Darkness is getting more powerful. Who's gonna do it if not us? So they keep working. We have a tournament at Olympus Coliseum, and during the tournament, it is revealed that this was all a plan by Hades to get Hercules into the Underworld and kill him, and Cloud's there too, for some reason. And Cloud decides to volunteer to go to the Underworld instead. So our character chooses to go into the Underworld to save Cloud from himself, basically, despite Chirithy making it clear that we aren't strong enough to go there yet. Going there puts us at risk. As the Underworld, the darkness there is implied to be stronger, more concentrated, more intense, however you want to think about it, than in other places. It's the land of the dead. Come on. So going there increases the risk of getting corrupted by darkness. The main character decides to go anyway, and also agrees to learn how to use the power of darkness from Hades in a convincing enough way that Chirithy feels the need to warn them about the risks of using such a shortcut. Even Hades himself calls them out for being a traitor when we turn on him. But Hades is the villain and should not be taken at face value, like most villains shouldn't. And right after going to this dangerous place, saving Cloud, dealing with the rest of the plot for Olympus Coliseum, and coming home, our avatar has a strange dream that the darkness encroaches upon. So the player can start connecting dots that the main character did not get away with going somewhere they shouldn't have unscathed. We were affected by the darkness in Underworld. They confirm it when the second Chirithy shows up looking just a little darker. It and our Chirithy have a conversation while our character's sleeping, and it kind of hints at what the dark Chirithy is, not too much detail. It's just a little hint, just a little breadcrumb. However, it is explicitly stated that this darker Chirithy opposes ours. And anytime a character opposes the main character in some way, they are our antagonist. They are the villain, quote, quote, of this story. And after this, we finally get some friends. Huzzah! Meeting Ephemer gives us more basic world building about how we're going to Disney worlds that technically shouldn't exist yet. We're basically going to empty places on this vast landmass that will eventually become a Disney world and sucking it dry of lux, or light if you want to use that word instead. So in very basic terms, we're draining the land beneath our feet of light and using it like a resource. And there are multiple factions trying to have the most lux to get an edge over their competitors. The symbolism is not subtle. Back to making friends though. Ephemer exists for a couple of reasons. The main one is to ask questions about the structure of Daybreak Town in a fundamental kind of way. These are questions the player should kind of have, or if they don't, Ephemer asking them should be like the prompt to start asking these questions. All types of connections are encouraged and powerful in Kingdom Hearts as a universe, but the structure of Daybreak Town specifically encourages people to only be loyal to their own faction and to see another faction's wielders as enemies. It's designed to reduce the number of connections a person could theoretically make in this world, as well as increasing the likelihood of a conflict like the Keyblade War, because wielders are othering each other rather than working together like they should be. Considering what the stated goals of the unions are, which is gather lux, keep the balance, and try to prevent the war, it doesn't make a lot of sense to make the unions compete this way. So Ephemer is right to ask why that is. Ephemer is prompting the player to be asking these questions and to be wondering why the unions are structured this way, like he is. Spending time with Ephemer and becoming connected as friends serves another purpose too, and this one's more directly plot related. Remember, the main character of this adventure suffers from loneliness and is slowly ground down over time by the pressure created by this impending war and the growing darkness. Ephemer is one of the few good things this kid has going for them right now, and they cling to it. Again, they've not had a good time. It's something to care about other than just their job. So when Ephemer stands us up, rude, our little avatar stays there all day waiting and has to be convinced to go home by Chirithy. And the way they convince us is by finally getting to be our friend instead of just our handler. There's also a tiny little reveal about what exactly Chirithy is, but a new player wouldn't know what it meant. So we're just going to kind of put a pin in that and come back to it in a later analysis. As far as a new player is concerned, that's a weird symbol on Chirithy's back, and that's all it is. However, even though we were reassured by Chirithy and we accepted what Chirithy said to go home, getting stood up like that still introduced sadness, grief into the main character's heart. Like, they may acknowledge and accept that Ephemer may have had an emergency, but it's still a broken promise. They were still stood up. Most people would feel disappointed if they were excited about something and then it got canceled at the last minute. Or they would feel like they wasted their time if something they thought was going to happen never does. So our main character is still not having a great time, but unfortunately the darkness still grows. They can't afford to take breaks. They can't afford to process this. It's just not a good time to do that. So we go help out some more in Wonderland because we gotta go there to help out. However, after coming back to Daybreak Down again, we have a dream about Ephemer, and because of the nature of the dream, our character insists on looking for Ephemer instead of working, which shows us, the player, that their priorities are shifting away from just doing their job really well. They're beginning to shift priorities to being loyal to their friends or looking for their friends. The conversation we have with our Chirithy is also the first time our character has been given any indication that things aren't going well behind the scenes, even though the player has been given a lot of indicators by this point. When we go looking for our friend, we're stopped by Master Ava, who does kind of a check-in to make sure the player has caught on to what the game has been visually showing us the entire time. Our avatar has been deeply affected by the loss of their friend and by the demands of their occupation. Because they were lonely before and did not have friends, the sadness in their heart has settled and they didn't process it properly, so it will cause our character to fall to darkness if left unresolved, if we don't fix it, if we don't let it go. Back in our room while our character sleeps, the player is given more world-building information when Ava and Chirithy have a conversation together. It's another reminder to the player that they should be thinking about this story and this world in an abstract way. They show us this by explaining that Ephemer used the intangible connection that he made with our main character to kind of call us to him, to summon us to his side in a really vague, cryptic kind of way. However, our character can't get past Ava right now. We tried and she beat our ass. So we have to go back to work. We can't look for our friend in that spot anymore. We are sent to Beast Castle, again, another escalation. And like the Dwarf Woodlands and Olympus Coliseum before, it gets to pull double duty to expand the idea that darkness isn't just limited to the more destructive emotions like anger, hate, jealousy, these kind of things. A heart can be corrupted by darkness by having too much sadness or doubt or despair. So even things that are not destructive can still lead a heart to darkness. By now, the game is beginning to be explicit about what's happening to our character because we've already got the check-in from Ava, and we're also again being thrown into more dangerous situations once we resolve the Beast Castle plotline. Our avatar is being sent directly into the corridor of darkness, and they have to wear special gear to do their job now as protection. It doesn't even protect us for very long, it's a temporary thing. Chirithy even goes to the union leaders out of concern for our well-being. We're not being given these missions because we're ready for them or because we're strong enough to take them on. It's because wielders are dying and someone has to go in there and fix it. And our little character here is already being tainted by darkness. So this just exacerbates the situation with our main character. It's, again, not a great time. So after doing a couple of these really dangerous missions, the game takes the time to show that our main character is getting worn out, is getting tired. They're getting burned out. And Chirithy attempts to motivate the character by mentioning the intensifying competitions with the other unions, but like, what's that gonna do? And this idea is immediately challenged by a new character named Skuld, who comes in. Earlier, Ephemer was posing the question of why the unions are structured like this. However, time has passed since then. It's been a few months. So now you have Skuld coming in to actually make the statement that the structure is broken, to challenge the system, to say that it's wrong. Ephemer may have asked the questions, but Skuld is the one to reject them. The player should be aligned with Skuld by this point. They should also be coming to this realization as well. It's not getting better, it's just getting worse. So, with the extra push from Skuld, our character again chooses to look for Ephemer instead of doing their job. We've got backup now. This is no longer a surprise, but it does further solidify that our character doesn't prioritize this job anymore. It wears them out. It's not rewarding. And by this point in their arc, and in the main plot's arc, we're near the end. So the writing is going to shift into explaining things and being explicit about the character arcs involved, the story arcs involved, what's happening, because they want to make sure that in case the player missed something, that we're now caught up. And also to make sure that everything is explained before these threads resolve, so no one's lost. Nothing from this point forward should be a twist or a shocking reveal. If they are, that's a bit of a problem, not on the writing's part, because the writing has done its job. I've mentioned a number of times where they have made multiple attempts to bring this point across. This is just a check-in. It's not meant to be your first thought about it. So, because the game is now being explicit, we get scenes where we physically see a couple of foretellers fighting each other. The Darklings show up, which is another escalation in darkness coming to attack us. The evil Chirithy comes to taunt us, who is looking a lot more like a Heartless now. These scenes are just the game being explicit about things they've already talked about or they've already shown us. So we get to the Foreteller's Chamber, and the game now spells out how the character has developed over this arc, because our character finally starts talking. The character explains in their own words that they have become so disillusioned by this point that they're willing to turn on a union leader even after hearing their friend was a spy and that they only hung out with us to get information. At this point, the main character has said, even if that's the case, it was not right for you to take him from me. The main character has more faith in the friend that has now been called a traitor than the union that they've been a part of for months at this point. Even after this point is resolved and Ava reveals the illusion and says, no, Ephemer's fine, I said this is a test, so on and so forth. Even after these things, our character refuses to become a dandelion because it would forsake the other wielders who are not given this choice. They aren't comfortable with that idea because, again, it's choosing this organization now of dandelions over people, over individuals, and they're not comfortable with that. We then resolve a lot of the initial stories of Wonderland, and we have been this entire time, but this is kind of like the final check-in to make sure that we've resolved all those conflicts. So we do all of that, and we make sure everything's all clean on that end. But then we are right up against the Keyblade War, and so now we're going to be talking about the Keyblade War. However, To do this, the game shifts our perspective to Chirithy, thinking about the Keyblade War as a past event. They make it clear from the onset of this perspective shift that every Keyblade wielder that is still alive, their memory of the Keyblade War has been overwritten. So we can't exactly stay with our character for the events that led to the Keyblade War. Our character would not remember them. It's also why this tends to skip around more, because Chirithy is thinking about it as something that happened in the past, rather than us as the main character going through it linearly. Chirithy first describes what their issue with it is. They describe the relationship between one's memories and the heart as it exists in Kingdom Hearts. You could change the word heart to soul and it would be the same. In Kingdom Hearts, even if the memory of a thing is gone or forgotten, it still affects someone's heart. If it's a painful memory, the pain remains even if the memory doesn't. This is a really simplified explanation of what happens to us during the course of our lives. If you think back to a real distant time where you felt wronged by somebody, or hell, even if it was a good memory, say you felt really loved by somebody or you really like this memory, right? You're unlikely to remember every detail from that memory. You'll remember the important parts. You'll remember the big events that led to you feeling a certain way. But the thing that's likely the most clear about this memory or sequence of memories is how the event as a whole made you feel. There's also a lot of evidence that suggests that events from our childhood shape a lot of our perceptions and personality as adults. So this idea is just an explanation that's been simplified of this concept. It's also another core concept of Kingdom Hearts that should be kept in mind as we go forward. Basically, connections are super powerful and the heart remembers even if the mind doesn't, to make it TLDR simplified. So back to the actual events of the Keyblade War. Honestly, the most important things during this time are the events directly leading up to it and the resolution of it, not necessarily a blow-by-blow of the war itself. Our character attempts to mitigate the violence happening between wielders in the events leading to the Keyblade War. To really no avail, at this point they're one person against multiple factions of people. It's really hard to do. Even if you have a couple of friends helping you, it's just not enough manpower. In fact, they do try and team up with Skuld again to try and find a way to prevent the war from happening, because now it's obvious the war is going to happen. They go and they talk with Gula, who reveals more details about what's exactly on the lost page, like verbatim, word for word kind of stuff. And this conversation with Gula being intercut with scenes from a conversation between Ava and Luxu is meant to signify that the poetic language on the lost page that Gula is describing is about this conversation between Ava and Luxu. It's meant to link these two things together. So, because of what is on the lost page, we know for a fact that what Luxu is saying is the truth. The lost page explicitly states that the truth is misunderstood. This is what happens. Ava misunderstands what Luxu is trying to say because he implies that the master intended for the Keyblade War to happen. She believes in her master. She trusts her master. And so she gets upset at Luxu for insinuating this and attacks him. This triggers the war. Right after we learn this and we're beginning to go, okay, do we stay in the Keyblade War or do we go and become a dandelion? The evil Chirithy comes and taunts us. They reveal during this confrontation that they belong to us. We are the one that tainted them. Our character has fallen to darkness, or at least has been tainted by it to an extreme degree. Again, this is something the player should know already. Every time we did something that put us closer to darkness, that put us at risk, they would let us know that what we did was dangerous. This Chirithy would show up very soon after every single one of these instances, looking noticeably darker, looking more like a Heartless, becoming more of a problem. So it's pretty clear that what we did affected this Chirithy, and not in a good way. So they're just, again, explicitly telling us what they've already been showing us throughout the game. We also were told right from the beginning that our character had darkness in their heart. We've gotten multiple confirmations that our character feels emotions that attract darkness, and darkness has shown up in at least one dream. The only thing that is additional details here is that the Power Bangle we've had from the beginning allows us to use darkness as a power without converting it into light like our Chirithy thought. So it's now revealed that this Chirithy has intentionally cultivated the darkness within us, so even when we weren't putting ourselves at risk, it was bound to happen eventually. How insidious. This Chirithy also implies that this was the Master's intentions. The Chirithys are creations of the Master of Masters. He would know this was something that could happen. The Chirithy literally goes, "Why am I here then? Why do I exist if it wasn't his intention to make me?" And it's also unlikely that Luxu and the Nightmare Chirithy were working together. They don't ever show a scene where these two have ever interacted at all. The only remaining question is why the Master would want to do this. It doesn't make sense. So we go through the Keyblade War. Our character is slowly ground down by this war because we have to deal with a war zone, and our character ends up being the sole survivor of the Keyblade War. The only reason why we don't die is because we're saved by Ephemer and Skuld. It's easy to forget because of the adorable visuals, but this story is a tragedy. No matter what it looks like on the surface, no matter how much Disney coding there is in this game, they are telling a serious story. We will explore what awaits our Dandelion in the next analysis video. Thank you very much for watching this incredibly long thing. If you made it this far, please like if you in fact liked it, and subscribe if you would like to see more of it. Bye!